Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we're talking about Dimension Shifter. I want to go a little bit more in depth. I just made a video a couple days ago talking about a potential ban list. We're kind of getting to that time in the TCG where we could potentially get one in the future weeks or 2 months kind of area. And so I want to talk more about Shifter specifically because I noted in that video that I don't think Shifter is going to get hit, right? We have Malice coming out, which is all about banishing their own stuff. And Ryziel itself also doesn't mind playing under Shifter. So 2 of the new decks from the newest set, kind of use Shifter as almost like a bonus selling point. And I think Konami won't touch it because of that. But the other really interesting thing, and really the basis of this video, is we might be in the very first format ever since Shifter's inception into the game where it is probably incorrect to main Shifter. And that's crazy because Shifter, basically ever since it's been printed, has been one of those cards where you were like, not too many decks can play it. Probably around 10% of decks can even like consider playing it. But it's always been one of those cards where it's so strong that like if your deck can play it, you main it. You just have to because it's I think the easiest way for me to sum this card up at this point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is there is not a single hand trap in Yu-Gi-Oh! That feels safe to open on its own. Strong enough to open on its own, where if it's the only hand trap you open going second, where you feel like pretty good, just looking at your hand before your opponent even starts to play, feeling like, okay, cool, I'm good. I'm going to slow them down and then I'm going to get them on my turn. This is literally the only hand trap where you can even feel that way after looking at your hand because, like I said, 80 to 90% of the decks you're going to run up against are literally just like, oh, they're somewhere between complete passing to like at most ending on like a 1/3 board. And even then they're probably losing resources to do it. So, it's always been such a powerful card, and to kind of drive home the point of like, why I think this card might is like specifically not going to be that is, so if you look at like the tournament results most recently, just topping deck lists, whether it's regionals or higher level events, YCS. If you look at the top decks here, you can see them kind of here: Tenpai, Snake Eye, Fire King, Yubel, Centurion, Memento, Ritual Beast, and Fiendsmith. We'll call those the top 8. That's, Fiendsmith is the lowest percentage here, but that's because it's counting like the whole last month, and the Fiendsmith deck just came into like playability, and it actually had pretty good results at the YCS like a week ago. So I expect that one to actually continue to get better results. So that's kind of my cutoff, is those top 8 decks, because we're also talking about introducing the 2 new decks from Crossover Breakers. So when you look at this tier list, this is how Shifter interacts into these decks. So when you Shifter your opponent, this is how much Shifter is affecting your opponent here if they're on these types of decks. So the top row here being straight cooked. These are the kind of decks that, like I said, like are either passing turn completely or like literally passing on at most a 1/3 board, and I feel like most of these decks in this tier like can't even get that far. So it's brutal. They don't even want to play, because if they do, these are decks that are all about the resource game and keeping stuff rotating, and if stuff gets banished, they could actually be in trouble, so they'll probably even just try not even to play at all. If they can, and try and rely on non-engine, but that's the power of Shifter. You can lose the die roll and still be in a really solid position versus these types of decks. So these are the 4 out of those 10 that out of the 10 decks that I think like Shifter's still really good against. And this is what most formats have been mostly these decks. But now we get to the next tier, which is the not too shabby tier. These are decks where Shifter does like something decent to them, but like these decks have ways to work around it somewhat. Malice, so you're going to lock Malice out of probably whatever their side engine is, whether it's like whether it's going into like the Cybers lines to get up into their stronger boards. You may keep them out of that, but they're still going to be able to do the like raw Malice stuff. And yeah, it may mean they're like a little bit weaker to a second hand trap, and they're not going to do a ton through Shifter plus that, but like you got to still have it. So it's like okay, but it's certainly not ending their turn. And then the Fiendsmith deck, this deck is about 10 Fiendsmith cards, 10 Kashtira cards, and then 20 non-engine. So they can rely on the fact that half their deck is non-engine, so they probably do 2 to 3 hand traps. And if they did see that one Kashtira card, a starter, then they're also just going to lean on the Kashtira engine with some hand traps behind it, and they can totally survive through the first Shifter and then play from there for the rest of the duel. It still turns off Fiendsmith engine, which is the most important engine in that deck, but like still, they can still manage for 2 turns until they're able to play. Into the next tier, the 90% online decks. These are 90% is a rough number. This is not an exact number, but these are decks where like they do somewhere between 75 and 90% of what their deck would do, normally unhindered under Shifter. And so that's like quite a large percentage for what we're trying to consider Shifter as, like this turn ending, like super strong hand trap. That's like one of the only maybe the only hand trap in the past that we felt comfortable being the only non-engine we ever open. It's not on that level versus these decks. You don't feel comfortable if you drop this versus them blind and you have no other non-engine, and then you're like, oh, they're still going to get most of what they want. And I still went -1 in the hand. So it's like a fair trade. Probably more than fair for them. And then the final tier, this is like the did they just plus tier. For me, this is just the tier where like these decks are so either unhindered at all or like just actually plus, like Ritual Beast like actually feels like they're better under Shifter. That is crazy, and it feels like no deck should feel like that under Shifter, but these are like worst case scenario. If you draw Shifter in your hand and you know what I mean, you line up against your opponent, you're supposed to be banking on Shifter to put you in a really good spot early in the duel, and then you realize you're doing nothing to them. It's literally a dead card in hand. That's never where you want to be. But overall, and I think it's really important to note as well, even though there's 4 tiers here, we're not breaking it down at the halfway mark. This line right here is not where we decide where the good matchups are. I actually think it's here. Like, for a card that is going to, one, probably hinder your deck somewhat, right? Because most decks fit into this, one of these 4 tiers, or one of these 4 decks, like these 2 tiers, I guess, on when they're considering Shiftering. There's very few decks that actually fit into this slot of, like, completely unhindered. And so if your deck's getting hindered somewhat, even if it's like the 10%, like we say in this tier, like, look at how much is hindering your opponent. Like, potentially not that much. Over half of these are not that much. And so I think we're just in a format where you really don't want to draw Shifter versus any of these 6 decks, to be honest. It just feels not impactful enough overall to really be worth it seeing them against these matchups. And so it's just these 4. And I know these 3 are going to be probably closer to the top of the tiers, but like Memento's basically at the bottom. It's literally the 10th best deck, like in that realm at the end of that list. So I just don't think it's good enough. I just don't think the percentage of decks you're going to run into where it's actually turn passing is high enough for you to main it. Now, it's still going to be in the side for sure, because you're going to run into these decks a decent bit, and other rogue decks, most rogue decks are going to not love to run into Shifter, so it's still useful for that, and it'll still probably be strong enough to have in the side once you know the matchup you're running into against, because especially post game 1, you're going to side in for game 2 and 3. So it's nice that it's a card that can go first or go second if the matchup is strong enough, and go from there. So it's not going to be gone completely. I don't think this card's getting cut from the format entirely. It's not unplayable. It's just probably got to be in the side instead of the main, and that just means you probably don't have to run into Shifter game 1 anymore in this upcoming format. If you're somebody who hates Shifter, which I know most players are, that's a cool sign. That's the first time you've ever been in that position ever. So that's really cool, and hopefully that means a healthier format going forward. I still think this format could be kind of cool. I'm kind of excited for it, because I don't think either of these new decks are like brutally toxic. I just think they're pretty good. And then as long as Konami addresses maybe some crazy things on a new ban list, that's not like a format-defining ban list, but just like, okay, handle some dumb degenerate stuff that's going on, I think I'd be pretty happy with this format. So there you go. That's kind of the idea behind the video. Just wanted to kind of throw my thoughts out there on Shifter and just the weird place we find ourselves going into the next format. And I want to know your guys' thoughts on it too. So let me know what you think down below. Do you agree with me? Do you just disagree with me? You just say, even so, main Shifter. I disagree probably, but like, I'm willing to hear you out if you got some explanations on it. So I'd love to hear where you guys land on this. Thank you so much for watching, though. Regardless, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'll see you in the next one. Subscribe to the channel for more stuff from me. It's been light on news, but we're kind of in between core sets. So as we start ramping up into Alliance Insight, as well as like the Magistus Link 2 and stuff, I think we could be loading up for a heavier back half of December for sure, where we get a lot more reveals. But yeah, I'm out of here for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.